Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi, Rachel Flanagan. How is Miss
Hello.
Flanagan?
The littlest is a full moon style Hellcat, and it's not even full moonable. It's like 6 days late.
Hi.
But hey,
Hi.
Kierra.
Hi.
The dog.
Yes, we're missing one table member. We're
Is
not
it my
sure if
mother?
she'll be here.
There
Alyssa.
she is.
Welcome to Talk Like a Mother Parenting Autism Podcast. We are Jenn, Kim, Rachel, and Jaime. Take a seat at our table as we share with hope, humor, and honesty.
Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight. We have a very special guest, which we're really excited about. Tonight on the podcast, we have Kierra Mcisaac. And if that last name sounds familiar, it's because it's Kimmy's daughter. And we wanted to bring her on because she's currently in school for her undergrad in communication sciences and disorders. Obviously, she also has an older sister who is on the spectrum, whose name we may not say tonight. Just putting that out there because she doesn't love when we say her name and she's in the room and we're respecting that. And currently she's a daycare teacher working with her mom. So hi, Kierra. Thanks for coming on.
Hello.
Hey, girl.
Thank you for having me.
First, for our listeners, we just need you to say in a bra in the car.
In a bra in the car.
Oh, a little bit.
There was a little
bit Mcisaac-y over there. Sorry, Jaime, carry on.
So
She does not have the Boston accent.
No,
she did a little bit.
not like
There was a
Kimmy.
We might send you a 6-pack from your aunties and see what happens, like a Mike's Hard Lemonade 6-pack.
Kierra, just talking about, to start with, like why you chose your major and what you're going for your undergraduate. Was that at all influenced by being the younger sister of a individual who is nonverbal?
It definitely played a factor. I actually switched my major 3 times before I decided on this.
Totally normal.
I definitely knew I wanted to like work with kids and like I liked teaching, but I didn't necessarily want to like be in a classroom setting. And I mean, I feel like working at daycare and seeing early intervention and obviously seeing how Alyssa and her struggles with communication, I think definitely played a factor.
And overall, how do you think it's influenced you being her little sister? Do you think it's changed your outlook on the world? Are you starting to notice that as you're getting in more into adulthood, like the outlooks other people have and some of your friends have?
Yeah. I definitely feel like it's made me a lot more empathetic, especially towards just like people I meet and like anyone really who's neurodiverse or like I feel like I'm a lot more understanding and yeah, I don't know.
We get it. We get it. So what are your current goals in the field of communication disorders? So that's what your undergrad is in. Are you looking to become an SLP? Where exactly do you want to go on this path?
I definitely want to become an SLP. That is the end goal. I'm not 100% sure what setting I'd like to work in. I think I am very interested in like developmental language, and autism is definitely like an interest of mine that I have. Especially, I took a class this past semester called Autism in Families, and I think that really kind of entered me into like that world from like a different perspective.
So what was that class?
So it very much, I think it's kind of how like you should like approach families and how like important like the family is, especially when these kids are young. We learned about like individual family service plans and how it's really important that you are working with these parents like to help these kids. It very much was like a lot more about like autism through like we looked at like the history through the years, and then we looked at like age like 0 to 22 and how that kind of like looks.
But did they know you have a sibling with autism?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Because it's one thing to teach it, it's another thing to live it, right?
My professor for that class actually, she was doing autism research, and then like while she was doing it, she actually had a son who like has autism.
Oh, that's helpful. I mean, really, for the relating part to it and the understanding part, the compassion part. I don't think you really
Tell them about the
I
exercise she had you guys do.
where we were like the parents of this child with autism, and like in this exercise we had like another child, and we had to like schedule our week, and we had to like schedule 2 hours of OT and 2 hours of speech therapy, and you have to work 20 hours, and you have a birthday party this weekend, and your car breaks down this week, and like try to schedule it all out and like we're doing it, and we're like, we can't do this. There's not enough hours. And she's, how do you think these families feel? So
That's
That's so interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
And then you made it rain with talk like a mother business cards in the room.
of course, yeah.
Of course, yeah.
No, but I think it definitely helps give people a perspective of like, oh, like my hours are 8 to 2 Monday through Thursday. Like, it's not always doable for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and, did you guys talk about like the role of like parents needing to also be able to help? Like, we're always told as parents, like, you also have to learn how these therapies work and stuff because we're supposed to implement them in life. And
Yes.
sometimes we're good at that. Sometimes we're not because it's hard.
It is. It is.
It's so interesting, Kierra, because we know so much about your home and your family. And, you know, we sit like in an open video call so many nights with your family. So we know, because we can relate as parents, that it's not always that you're going to grab the device to get more communication, or that it's like reasonable to have all of the tools all of the time. And that even though speech and certain lessons from her speech over the course of time have been goals of your sisters, it's not always like the pressing thing and you're trying to reach for the toolbox and get all the things together. So like, you know, that dynamic of lessons and implementing, I think that's probably gives you so much insight into how you'll bring techniques to families, because it's like that unspoken understanding that you certainly can't learn from a textbook. You know, it's like,
well, yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, for the teacher, especially to have a child on the spectrum, like you said, Rach, I mean, you can read all this textbook stuff, but you really don't know what a true meltdown is. People don't, that's a chunk that is kind of missing, you know? So I think that's great that her professor, teacher at her college, because I only went for 2 years.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you become an SLP? What's the journey from where you're at? What else do you have to do to obtain that?
You need to complete an undergrad in usually communication, sciences and disorders, or something related. And then you go to get your master's in speech language pathology. And then you have to pass this exam called a praxis. And then you have to do a clinical fellowship. And then you can be a licensed SLP in your state.
How many years is that?
So undergrad's usually about 4 years. The master's is 2 years in a summer. So basically like 2 years.
Yeah.
And then the clinical fellowship, I think it's usually around 9 months. So basically a year.
You're like, actually, I've been doing the fellowship since I was born. So I'm going to pass this.
Time served.
Yeah.
And tell them how many schools in Massachusetts offer this.
Oh, so for the master's program, only I think it's 7 or now it's 8 schools in Massachusetts have it as a.
So it's super competitive and
Interesting,
like hard to get in.
Hard to get into, but it's a growth.
No pressure though, Kierra. No pressure.
Your mom stares at you.
I'm like, no wonder why there's not enough speech therapists.
I know. That's what I was just thinking. Like, I was thinking about my response. Like, should they open the floodgates and change the criteria so that we can have more trained people? But then I'm like, well, that's less training, Rachie.
Yeah.
Higher quantity, less quality. Oh no, that's where I want to be.
And so if after completing your undergrad, you can become an SLPA, but
that means like an SLP, Kierra would write the plan and then you would be like a tech in the clinic that does the therapy. Is that right?
SLP with like a 60 client caseload, like you could send your SLPAs can like perform therapy, but they can't diagnose, they can't write what you're doing, like write up the description of what like.
Listen, Kierra, if it's anything like a doctor, don't do it. Nurses do all the work and they don't get paid like doctors. Don't be the aide, be the SLP.
And the thing about it is, so when you're an SLPA, Kierra, correct me if I'm wrong, you're working under the SLP's license.
Yeah. I've been told by many professors, like a lot of SLPs don't like to work with SLPAs because they're operating under your license. So like if they do anything wrong or anything happens, it's like on you.
Okay, so with the field, I mean, within autism, we know there's always new research and all that. In the world of speech, I feel like it's pretty similar. Like, you know, it's like if we have a younger speech therapist, they're trying different things. There's new techniques they seem to be more readily prepared to like try out. Are there new things that you're learning that you can tell us that are like newer research in the field of communication?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like some of the research I have is definitely more like in autism, but one thing I learned about I took a neuropsych class is we learned about these things called mirror neurons, which are cells in your brain that activate when you see someone perform a task and when you yourself perform a task. And this is linked a lot with empathy and social learning and imitations. And they have a lot of theories now that this is connected to autism, and kids with autism have less mirror neurons. So they have a lot harder time with like that social learning.
That makes so much sense because I always said that about my son when he was little, like watching my daughter grow up and watching my son grow up, like she would just mimic what other people did automatically. And my son would, in a way, like he might script or echo exactly what someone says. But outside of that, it wasn't like, you just open this cabinet and grab this jar. He would not understand that. Like there was no mimicking of anything. So that makes like, I believe that. I don't know anything about
I
science.
know. I'm like, I'll put in my research for that new theory as well.
She was saying something earlier, and she's like, "Mom, what's that word?" And I'm like, "What?" And she's like saying all these things, and I'm like, "Kierra, I do not know what you're talking about. You're like above my pay grade right now."
For learning, which obviously is just like watching and then learning. But I was like, there's a word for it, and I know
And
it's not.
She's like, "Yeah, you know the neuron or whatever she just said." I was like, "No, I don't."
Actually, I do not.
So what's your favorite part of all, like, is it the advancements, like the new stuff that you're learning? And like, what do you find the most interesting?
Oh, I love all of it, but I really like, so now that I'm like in these upper level classes, like what's happening now is like a lot of my classes are like connecting in topics. Like my audiology class is connecting to neuropsych class, which is connecting to my autism class, which I just think is really interesting. I don't know, I definitely have a strong interest in like developmental speech. Like I just think like that 0 to 3 critical age period is like so interesting, and like so much can really happen like that's in that period. And yeah,
I love that. Kierra, to our listeners, when Jaime posed that question, Kierra sat up like, I don't know, like that sexy Colin Bridgerton just walked in. Like she just got so excited to like say what she loved. I mean, it's thrilling to see people coming in to the field that have that giddy nature, Kierra. It's so good. So good.
I genuinely love what I learn. Like I think 90% of the classes like I think are so interesting. Like I learn, and I take like a very large range. Like I take speech anatomy classes, I take linguistic classes, English classes, Spanish classes. Like I think it's really interesting.
What do you learn in the autism class that you mentioned? Like, has anything, like surprised you?
Yes, a lot. I mean, we learn about the history of autism, which really is like horrible.
Yeah.
And like we just learned about like the institutions, we learned about the origin of ABA, we learned about like how as in the early 1900s, like we called childhood schizophrenia. Like autism wasn't even a word yet. We read this book called In a Different Key, and it really just like followed a bunch of like these like kids who had autism like through their adult years. And like we learned like in like the 40s, once you're diagnosed with autism, like it was called refrigerator mother. Like they're like, oh, their mother secretly didn't want them and that's why they have autism. And like at doctor's offices, it took a lot of like parents advocating and forming groups, and like eventually they're like, okay, that's actually not the reason. Like I know I love my child. Like
that may have been over in theory, but man, it still just feels like that. It feels like that in the Target. It feels like that in the doctor's office still, like that like sense of questioning and validating constantly. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's that far back in history because it's still happening.
Well, and I feel like this comes from like a certain type of people that I will not name or label directly on here, but you still hear it all the time. You hear like, oh, autism's just an excuse for bad parenting. Autism's a made up, diagnosis. I think especially for like kids who are, at a higher functioning level. I don't want to say high functioning, but you know what I mean? Like a lot of parents, I mean, you'll hear a lot of people saying like, oh yeah, they're just saying that about their kid, or they just searching that diagnosis, where it's like, no, didn't want my kid to be diagnosed with a lifelong disability. Thank you though. Thank you. But there's still like a lot of misconceptions out there about it. Thankfully, not that bad. And thankfully, our kids are not shoved into asylums and all the horrible things that happen. But it's also that big thing where a lot of people are like, oh, why are all of a sudden there's so many people with autism? And it's like, there's always been people with autism. You just haven't seen them. They've been tucked away, and their parents, mainly the mothers, have also been tucked away because there's been nothing to help them. There's been no resources.
I don't know. I feel like I honestly, a lot of what I learned too is just how much we really don't know, and like how much we're still like not sure, or like we have some research says this and some research says this. I feel like it's just still very unpredictable.
Which is wild because, you know, what's the rate now? Is it 1 in 33, 1 in 32 children are diagnosed?
Maybe, I don't know. It's pretty high.
What's your next steps after graduation into grad school and all that?
Towards grad school?
Yeah. So where are you going to grad school? Are you trying to stay within the same school? Are you looking to go somewhere else?
So, I mean, I'm definitely gonna apply to all schools in Massachusetts. I would love to stay at my school, but our program only holds about like 20 to 25 students, and obviously my class is larger as other schools will be applying there. So really, it's gonna be where I get in.
Do you have a bit more in already being at the college or no?
I don't think so.
No, huh?
You can also apply, Kiki, in Minnesota and Colorado. You've got an auntie there that will just charge you basic speech on Thursday night.
Hold on a
It's like
second. I
not
live
big
in
deal.
like the most beautiful city in the world. So I don't know if you've heard of Vancouver,
you're
British
in too.
Columbia, but we have
Yeah,
If you want to go abroad,
in-house SLPs.
Settle down. She needs to be licensed in Massachusetts because that's where she lives.
Kimmy's like, she's actually not leaving my
well,
house.
Kimmy, she could go somewhere else and be licensed in a different state.
No, she
Just kidding.
could.
I'm just kidding.
Kimmy's
I'm
like,
joking.
actually, Jamie, no, she cannot.
I'm just kidding. Never. Don't leave Massachusetts.
Listeners,
It's
it looks
actually a
to
really
Gil,
good state. for
Jamie
all.
has officially been knocked
Yeah.
right over that chair.
I'm not certain if I'm going to phrase this right, but something that we hear as parents all the time, and this is not just speech, but also development in regards to autism, like, language being a part of that. We hear so often that you have to like get into these therapies and early intervention. And I think even you had mentioned like this window of speech where there's this boom of language, like from 0 to 3, this like typical progression. For us, and I'm saying us, like the 4 of us as moms, we have all identified with the fact that we feel it's not like because my daughter has autism, she will never get to a certain milestone, but rather that she might take 13 years to get someplace. Like your sister is speaking so much from age 22 to currently, but even within that, we see these bursts of like where development sort of like comes in a cluster. And it makes me think that it's that same sort of cluster or skill that would be happening if it was a typical timeline. It's just so delayed. Like it's like your sister titles things and now she can put a few words together, and that's following such a typical process. It's just so delayed. Do you feel like you learn that, or do you sort of learn that like if you don't get this kid help by 5 or 8 or 10 that it's over?
So I definitely think like in my autism class, I just where autism is a developmental disability, that kind of does, I think, sometimes change like the period in which things come out. But I really feel like that whole period too, it's just really important for their like, I feel like receptive too, like that they're getting this speech in and they're hearing and able to like, even if they're not able to express that speech, I think it's very important that they're exposed to it. I feel like it's like what I learned, because if you're not exposed to speech in between that age, like is when like, because we used to learn about how some parents, like if their kids can't talk, or like I've learned this a lot with like more of like deaf children, that like if they're not exposed to language by the age of 3, like that is when it's really like hard for them.
It's going to be tough to build
That
that.
reminded me, Kierra, when you said that. I had forgotten that I was told along the way, and it's particularly by an SLP who changed our life, best therapist we ever had, and then we met Chelsea Cheeseburger, that people think they instinctively know how to talk. They do not. Like, you have to teach a child to speak. Like, it is not an instinctual thing that just happens. So if you lock a kid in a basement and you never teach them to speak, chances are that child isn't going to speak. So I forgot about that.
Speech is such a complicated process. It's
Yeah.
a miracle the average child can like start saying words by the age 1. Like it is like there's just so much. There's so many parts of your brain that are involved. There's so many parts of your body, like your lungs, your like if you can articulate your mouth, if you're all the parts of your brain work to like produce it. Like it really is such a complicated process, and like kids need to be taught. Like kids need to be taught how to do everything, but it's really crazy.
It makes sense to me. You know, I'm sorry to have asked that so long-winded, but it's like it makes so much sense to me. Like your response is that still exposing someone is reinforcing receptive language skills, but also giving them the infrastructure of what they can build on, whether that comes tomorrow or in 10 years.
Yes. I think, if they have that at least foundation in that period, that like things may come on like later down the line or develop later.
I think we see that in autism in a lot of ways of like we practice these things with our kids and then suddenly, not even just speech wise, but in general, and then suddenly like a year later, it's like they can do it. And sometimes when that pops up with us, with Jesse, every once in a while, like it pops up in a way that it seems like he's been doing it, but it's like, I think he has been taking in what we've been showing him, but he hasn't showed us. And so, we haven't ever had like that miracle moment that a lot of like, some people talk about, oh, it just clicked. But sometimes it's like, oh, you were paying attention, even though it did not look like you were paying attention whatsoever at all. It's just, and I think that's connected. I don't know if Kierra, you've learned about this at all, but I've learned a little bit about it through one of the therapists we've worked with is like working memory, and how in autism, some people believe that the working memory is like completely different than the typical brain. And so, for example, I could have a conversation with my son tomorrow, and then in a week from then, he might respond to that conversation as if we just had it. And so I wonder if that's all connected. And of course, that's probably lost in all the research of everyone trying to figure out autism. But I do really think like there is planting that seed in those first few years when the brain is learning so quickly, so much that maybe pops up. And like in your sister's case, like 20 years later, like who knew?
The funny thing is that about her is that she used to say these things or make these verbalizations, not like words, not really even sounds, but like we'd be like, huh, it almost sounded like she said this, or isn't it funny that she said it at this time? Now, us having no idea at all that there was anything to this. It was just kind of like not like a joke, but like I feel like almost like wishful thinking, but like, you're like
if you heard it, you'd like celebrate it, but also talk each other out of it. Like she didn't just say I love you or whatever. Be like,
did she just say I'm mad? Because it sounded like it, but like it didn't really sound like it, but like it almost had like
when she used to get angry.
Yes.
Like
yes.
She'll say sentences. I'm like
I swear speech comes out so much better when someone's angry.
Or has a fever.
Except me, I can't speak when I'm mad. But it like this is going back years, right? Like probably to like her teens. Now I realize she was saying words. She was saying them, because I didn't know if like it's like does she know? She'll say anything. Like if we ask her to repeat something, it might not come out the way like it's supposed to sound, but like I could tell in here she knows what she's saying. It just kind of gets mumbled in the process. Where for years we didn't know that. We didn't know if she even like knew what the word was. It's crazy. And then now I can see it, like, because you'll tell her to say something and sometimes it's a little more clear and other times it's kind of, because she has the apraxia, so like everything just gets like kind of like very mixed up with the motor planning of how your mouth and everything has to go in tongue and all that stuff.
So Kierra, how much do you guys learn about different means of communication? Have you guys at all learned about how now like this whole spelling movement is happening? And then also like, are you learning about how like using AAC devices? I'm sure. And does sign language come into all this? Do you need to learn sign language?
I have taken a sign language class. Like my school offers them. It's not necessary, but like I don't know, one of my professors says it's one of those things, you don't use it, you lose it. So it's better to learn a little bit, like other than like the basics. And so we have a upper level class on AAC devices and alternate communication we can take. I have not taken that class yet. I probably will end up taking it So we do have a whole class on it, but it's not really something we learn a lot about like throughout our coursework.
Yeah, that's more like probably graduate level.
Yeah, so we do have a class to take on it. It's kind of optional because we'll learn about that at master's.
I'm just curious if it's moved down in the education, just because I know they've really figured out with the AAC device that it's leading to language a lot quicker than they thought. I mean, even when Jesse was little, we were afraid to try an AAC device because we thought that would somehow replace him wanting
desire
to
to
speak.
speak.
And now I'm learning I should have tried an AAC device, but it's also expensive.
See, my daughter is very verbal most of the time. There's some caveats there. But she has Proloquo to go on her phone, iPad, and on my phone. And, you know, it's so interesting. We've learned in being Sealies that, like, the more we offer her, even if she uses 8% of this tool, 50% of this tool, always reaches for that tool. Like, more is more because it's a gateway potentially to some breakthrough, you know?
Yeah, that like any means of communication they are giving you to work with. Like especially at like such like these developmental ages, like anything you can give them that they can communicate with you, even if it's not necessarily like verbal, to start there. And then eventually hopefully that leads to like understanding, which then leads to producing some communication. And I don't know, we also learn about like how sometimes when kids are exposed to two types of communication, like it sometimes just takes them longer to be able to like produce either type of
Big sense.
That's what we were taught with learning like a child born in a dual language home, is that sometimes it takes them longer to learn how to speak both languages or how to speak in general because of that, but once they do, it's like bam. Like I have a niece who can speak Portuguese and English, like I'm like I can't even speak English.
I'm just struggling over here with the one.
Like bilingual household. We also learn that about like when you're raising a deaf child, how if you try to introduce sign and language, how sometimes it just takes them longer to develop it. Not necessarily that, because some people are like, oh, you need to pick one, but like it really just takes longer for them to like grasp both.
And I think the thing with the AAC devices is that it really showed people that a lot of these kids really understand so much more than you realize. You know, because they're able to show you the understanding through the device. And a lot of people
feel like
have no idea that their child could even understand any of this stuff.
I feel like so many of the other tools, especially when you think about speech though, are so like one lane. Like PECS, for instance, it's like what cards do you have? Are they in the right spot? Did your kid eat them? Did your kid try to slice you with them? Like that's just my bill, I'm sorry, but like PECS was one lane where her AAC device meets her where she's at. If she needs the pictures, she goes to the buttons. If she's totally in a flow and she's trying to like take the information she says like in letters, she'll go to the keyboard and then type it so that she can see the words, hit the button, and it says apple. Like she can use it backwards and forwards because it's so broad, where all the other things that we've learned are so narrow, you know? I think the AAC is life-changing for so many ways of learning.
It's their voice, really. I mean,
Well, and it's like the PECS obviously had to exist. I mean, and they still, and I know
those Velcro PECS all over my house.
Yeah, I know.
Oh
they
God,
created
so
miracles, and they were really, that's what they had to do, obviously, to start out with because the technology wasn't there. But man, those little cards everywhere.
God.
Stop, brush your teeth, wash hands. Like, oh my God.
I still have it in the bathroom, the whole brush the teeth instructions.
We had a big like 8x10 sign that said no outside on the door. So
yeah,
it was like when that was up, she couldn't go outside. She was just like, yeah, okay, lady. We tried.
Kierra, what part of your like I'm not sure if you've seen into an SLP's practice, but we get so one-laned in terms of thinking about autism, and speech would be for autism and blah, blah, blah. But like, there's so many different disabilities that would benefit from speech, like someone who's deaf or whatever. What is the population that you'd be serving outside of just autism? There's the words I wanted.
You can work with any age from 0 right up until death. So if you can work with older patients who recovered from strokes, or have like Parkinson's or anything like that to help them like retain that speech. Also, as an SLP, one of the things we can do is swallowing. So we help a lot of times stroke patients or like infants in like a NICU type situation. So I could work at a hospital doing swallow studies. I could work at a private practice. I could work with all kids under 3. I could work with middle schoolers. I could work in a school setting. I could work with high schoolers. Like there's such a range and so many places like I could be.
It's cool. We know
And
where you're gonna be, but whatever.
Obviously the exposure at the daycare helps her a ton too, because it's like not only does she have the experience with autism in like for real autism, not like a touch of autism, like, and she has the experience with the small children, like, which, you know, it's not that easy to relate to children 1, 2, 3, like if you're not used to being around children. So you can have like all these courses in the world, but it's not gonna really help you with the temperament of a 2-year-old if you don't have experience with a 2-year-old. So I think it's really like a wealth of knowledge for her to be able to bring in to the field with her. And she works with like the 1-year-olds right now, so it's like she's kind of right in that
window
range with those kiddos. Yeah.
I'll never forget when my daughter swore at putting on her shoes at the SLP when we were leaving, and Jackie was like, 2 points, language and proper use of language. We're like jumping up and down, celebrating the potty words. A word
Here,
is a
talk
word.
about that thing you were telling me about the other day, that predictability thing.
I'll try to remember something, but like it was very much about like the formation of predictability in kids with autism and how it affects their social skills and like their language, and it was something else. But basically like they think kids with autism don't have as like good predictability, so like they don't really have that ability to predict what's going to happen next, which is why like routines and rigidity is like really so like essential to them. I wish
that's good. And it was like on how to like respond, or like, you know, different what comes next, stuff like that. They struggle so much with that, which like we kind of sort of know that already, but like listening to her explain it, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense, where there's like some kind of deficit in that area for a lot of the kids where they can't like do that.
And
It's
don't you think that like creates anxiety, like to not ever know? Like when I think about that, my son's not like, I mean, he's a big routine guy when a routine needs to be in place. It's kind of like your sister on vacation. Like once she's on the vacation, she's good because she doesn't need the routine. But with my son, it's like during school, he needs that routine at school. But when he's home on summer break, we don't necessarily need to like reenact the school routine, and he's fine. But when he watches like a new movie or a new show, he has a really hard time. He can't for some reason in his mind be like, okay, this is an action movie, so this is probably going to happen. This is, even though he's seen a million of them. So like the unpredictability, but I'm like, that would have to create anxiety in everything you do, because you can't even like surmise what's coming next. It freak you out.
That's why Celie like watches the same episode of something again and again and again. It's not like she likes Daniel Tiger anymore. She likes the allergy peach episode, and she watches it because she knows what's coming. She finds comfort.
I mean, I love to rewatch my favorite shows. Like it's sometimes a comfort to know how something's gonna end. Like
yeah.
But I feel like you naturally want to give your children like variety. Like you naturally want to be like, why don't we try a different movie, or why don't we try something different? And they're like, nah.
No.
So I totally get that in my son, because if there's a song I like, I will listen to that song about 15 million times. Like I'm a 35-year-old woman, and last month I think I listened to that Espresso song 1,000 times.
Because it's amazing.
And I'm not
35.
I'm working late
because I'm a singer. Yeah. But I get it. And like, I mean, yeah, I watched my favorite shows over and over again. It drives my husband a little nuts. But they comfort you.
Well, that's what it is.
Mixing the nostalgia, it's too much.
Yeah, especially with movies too. I don't do it as much with TV, but like with movies, it's like there's a certain go-to movies that you have that are just like.
I've watched The Vampire Diaries probably about 10 times.
It fits Mick Isaac home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that track.
Kierra, tell them also to just touch on this a little bit. Obviously, we interviewed Mary Ellen, who was an ABA therapist a couple weeks ago, and got her take on ABA. Kierra has her teachers have some interesting views on ABA.
Yeah, my Autism professor is really against ABA and not for it. And I mean, we learn a lot in the class about the origins of ABA and how like the punishments were to get rid of undesirable behaviors in these kids, and a lot of these methods were physical abuse and electroshock and stuff like that. And even now we just kind of see how like she is really sees that like it does not mimic like natural play, and like it tends to make a lot of kids like prompt dependent and stuff along those lines.
Yep, you were saying earlier how like they say it's not realistic to carry over to like real life sometimes.
Yeah, like, and I've also just through a couple of my professors, like speech therapists in particular, really don't like ABA because like we very much just it's like anything that works to get them to talk. Like we want them to talk. Like we don't want them to like do A B C D to like produce this word. Kind of is how I feel like it's been explained to me.
It like messes with the initiation process, basically.
Yeah.
Where it's like, where it's like it's not coming about naturally, it's almost being forced. This is what Kierra was saying, her teachers are saying. So I just
So
thought that
like
was
they would be
interesting.
using ABA tactics to like for speech.
I think like just say like somebody is doing ABA for like behaviors, and they're like I'm trying to think of the example I was given, but like it's like they have to do like if they want you to like raise your hand before you talk, like if you talk without raising your hand, they're like no, like don't do that, like or like whatever the thing is. Where like a lot of like speech therapists, I feel like it happens a lot because obviously it's like very behavior based. Like they just want these kids to like be saying things or participating or talking, and they're like they don't like. I think they conflict a lot.
Like when my son kept saying, "Oh,
You're
just have therapy," and they kept trying. They're like, "Do you want us to stop it?" I was like, "No, he's speaking." So you let him say oh shit, and you let him quote The Office, okay? Even if it's inappropriate. But I totally agree
Obviously,
on like the whole. I mean, that was just like just something that's so the idea of ABA, which we've done. I'll say we've done. It's helped us in a lot of ways. But the whole like carryover as if you at home as a parent are supposed to be not just implementing the therapies, because at the basis you can work on a reward system. That's my parenting in general. And I've watched a lot of kids. I'm usually more rewards based than punishment based. But like to like chart everything and do like that is not always possible when you have like a job and other children and this and this and that. And so, and then when you talk to like some ABA therapists, they're like, oh yeah, for the therapy to work, you have to do that. And it's like, okay, well, we don't live in that world. We don't live in that pretend
Not
world.
realistic. Like
but also like being trained, like ABA is small bits of skills stacked up onto each other to create, like you are trained that A is this, and then you do this, B. Speech, what you're saying, Kierra, is that like you want the floodgate open. You don't
Yeah.
want anything to hinder that person's ability to initiate speech, to
yeah,
have that
like
desire.
yeah, in this very specific setting. Like we want them to be able to apply this to their every aspect of their life. Like
Yeah,
which is
and I'm sure that when like if Seeley was in speech and ABA, which in Minnesota we do very often together. So like at her ABA center, she went to speech. There's an SLP there. So like they're more integrated here. But still, the ABA goals are these things, and then the speech goals are these things. It's not necessarily honored in both ways. So it gets a little convoluted for her, and it makes her like wanted to shut down in order to perform in both and not mix it up or whatever. So like I get, even your sister was doing speech. It was so triggering because it was on that goddamn iPad or like laptop, remember? And then you quit, so the pressure is off, and she continues to explode right after. Like after she trusted that threat is not there every Tuesday night, her skills
well,
exploded.
and then we go
like
back,
it's so interesting how it's emotional as well.
and you go back to the predictability where they were constantly changing her therapist. So every time she opened the computer, every couple of weeks it was a different person, and I think that is really what set that thing in motion, because she now didn't know what to expect. She now was like, who's going to be on the other end of this? And I don't think that her brain can't handle that. Her brain can't handle that. Like, I think thing of like not knowing who it's going to be. and I feel like in real life, it doesn't necessarily do that. Like if she had a different therapist, she'd be fine. She would go with them. But on the computer, it's like you're opening it up and she's expecting to see one person. And it was just a constant rollover, like, because it was, the
Yeah, but
pandemic
there's even like
and
if
all that stuff.
somebody's got that Mary Ellen kindergarten like chutzpah,
Yeah.
And then you have somebody that's like, we're gonna play the game, get out the apples, blah blah blah. Like
Yes.
It's
she's
all
not into it,
like it ranges from therapist to therapist. Like I feel like they just have a lot of like leeway they can each take. So I think you're getting a range of different therapies. And
Well,
I mean, one thing we learn a lot about in class is like they really want us to be like contextualizing therapies. Like not every kid is gonna see a picture of a sun on a card and be like, oh, that thing in the sky is the sun. Like they really want us to do a lot of like hands-on activities and like really like surrounding them in it, like so they can apply it to like their lives.
We had like you said, kind of hands-on. That's how our SLP was. She was on the ground with my daughter. For Kaya, learning things like under and above, on top. Under were very hard concepts. So Jackie would like jump on the table and be like on top, then jump under the table and be like under the table. It's like things like that. She really, like you said, was very hands-on, teaching her what the words were and what they meant. Because she's like you said, Kierra, she can just say table, but she has to know what a table is. She has to know what the top of a table is and what the underneath the table is, kind of like under, that kind of stuff. And then she said, take a picture of her doing all of these things. And then she made her a picture book and labeled what each with pictures of her of what each thing was. So
that's what they do with Jesse too.
yeah, I
Like,
think that's just, great.
he wouldn't sit somewhere, like he wouldn't sit at circle time unless there was a picture of him sitting.
Yeah.
But I
Really
think
doing
in
like
general,
those social stories just become big ass pecs as far as I
yes, that's what it became. Just more packs, more.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, just in general, like with with any therapy, but like we did ABA, and we had like an amazing therapist named Olivia, and like, she was in our home, and I'm like, when it comes to like speech, and she never hindered that. Like it was always encouraging. I think it was great. So if that makes you feel a little better, I do believe there are a lot of changes in ABA, but with all that being said,
Yes,
it's like
it's definitely
turnover.
evolving.
Yeah. The turnover in any of these therapies, that's such a big problem because we know as parents, like, yes, it would be nice if like just any person worked implementing these things, but it's like, it's so much about that relationship with the kid and the therapist. And then obviously we can't control this in the world, that there's such a need for therapists. It's hard to become a therapist, but the turnover is so high and it sucks so bad. Like when I'm sure, like Kimmy, when you open that laptop and it's a different person, you're like, go away. Like,
well, and then like there was one new person who just, I'm not gonna say she didn't mesh well with Alyssa because I don't think she could fully understand. And they have the iPad on this like in their hand, and then Alyssa has the iPad and she's like, find the bus. Alyssa, press the bus. Where's the bus? Hit the bus. I'm not gonna run you over with a bus if you say it one more time. Like,
oh my God.
and she's like getting so overwhelmed because it's like, I was just talking to Kierra about this earlier. This is something that I think, Jenn, you had said your speech therapist had said this to you. I didn't learn this until Alyssa was about 10 or 11 years old. The lady goes, hold on, give her a minute. This is more for her receptive language. And then we gave her a minute and I'm like, and she did the task. And like even now, sometimes I'll have to like I'll remind Neil. I have to remind myself. It's like, okay, stop saying it. You have to stop saying it because every time you say it to her, you're basically like restarting the process.
So Jackie said, she's like, give her a minute.
I think like described it so perfectly when she said it's like when a computer's loading and you keep hitting the button and then it keeps restarting and you got to just stop and let it load. I'm terrible with that. I constantly hit that button. But it's like such a crazy analogy that makes so much sense, especially like for my daughter, because it's like, first of all, she has to finish tasks before she can do another task. Yeah. Second of all, her processing is slow. So she needs that extra time. If we call her for dinner and she's laying down on the iPad, she has to, if she's playing a game, she has to finish that game. She has to X out of that app. She has to get back to the home screen, click the button to like make the iPad go dark, put it down before she could even like think of like stepping off the bed to come out here. And we're like, come on, food, eat, like, you know what I mean? And she's like, ah! But yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, it's like such a thing for her. She has to finish a task. So it's like, it's
That's
just all
Jesse
these
too.
things that you kind of learn along the way, you know?
That's Jesse. He can't think of something. If he's not able to finish something, he literally cannot think of what he needs to
Like,
do next. Well, at least it seems that way. And then
like
Yeah.
there is a shorted circuit in
Yeah,
between it until
and then
something's
if you
finished. Yeah.
pull him from that, ooh,
Ooh.
all about
I
it.
just found it.
The dad likes to do that. Dad
Can you
likes
see that?
Oh, that's so cute.
Hardcover.
Cute.
What is Kaya doing? And every single thing, I am having fun. Pictures of her having fun. And every single one, pictures of Kaya with
Aw.
what it was. And she made her a hardcover book. And she loved it because she likes
So
looking at
cool.
herself.
That's so cute.
Jesse too.
Yeah.
I would guess that processing, like whether you were dealing with someone who had a stroke or someone that's just developing language or one of our kids, like processing has so much to do with learning. And I don't know, like, is there some way that you guys as trained therapists can see a person's processing speech and know that you're going at the right pace? Or is it just like your mom and all of us have learned, like, oh, hold the phone just a minute, give her a second to absorb that?
Not things we really learn in class though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always just so interesting. I'm like, hey, therapist, I trust that you are here for my daughter to help us with this thing. And I feel like you should know everything about us or everything about autism because you come to us and we're on your caseload. I constantly remind myself, like, they're
Like-
here for speech.
Yeah. I think it's also very much pushed, like, we're just told, like, usually these mothers, these parents, they're the one who knows their kids best, especially when you're working with, like, young kids and kids who, like, who are nonverbal. Like, make sure to be in communication with them and seeing, like, what they think is going to help their child.
Well, and
Mhm.
I think you'll eventually learn about processing time in graduate school or whatnot, because it's been shoved down my throat by every speech therapist we've had. Like, give a minute, and which is so hard because, you know, I don't know your guys' experience, but like when Jesse wouldn't speak, I would be in the car or somewhere with just talking away, and they would say, ask a question, whether or not he answers. And so I would ask a question, and they're like, okay, then give a minute. And so then you're sitting there, and it is the longest minute of your life. And then you ask another question, and you're just talking to yourself, and you feel a
That
little crazy.
practicing is hard. Like
It's hard.
And I will say that
The
and I've
pause.
talked about it before, hardest piece of advice I was ever given was from our SLP that said, you have to do the work at home. It is almost more important at home that you can, I can only do so much in this office, 1 hour a week. You have to implement hence the book, like to teach her what is, I am, those kind of things. And it was like, you have to do the work at home just as much as she does for her to be successful. It's on you, mom, kind of thing,
I think we put like a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation into speech therapists because I full-heartedly thought, like, I'm gonna take her to a speech therapist. They're gonna teach her to talk because that's what they do, and she'll be good. Like, it's gonna, because we had to wait a really long time to get into speech therapy because our early intervention place like services a bunch of different towns, and they only had one at the time. So it's like took a while to get it, and then when we did get it, it was like not that frequent. So like it wasn't until she was 3 and we kind of did private speech that and then she got it at school. But like I just had this expectation that like that's what a speech therapist does. I mean, and I think a lot of people think that. Like
They
even
do,
now,
Kimmy.
like I think
They
yeah,
do. They assume you're gonna make my kid talk, like that's your job kind of thing. When in the reality is they can only give you the tools to help your child, right?
Yeah. And I think it's like communicating, like it is speech therapy, but it's like they need to help you teach your child to communicate or teach you to communicate with your child. That's the key thing. But like, as a mom, like I feel like a lot of us, I know I did, and you just fixate on the speech. Like you just fixate on getting them to talk, and then everything else will fall into place and be fine. Like,
Then the catch-up train will happen.
And I felt though, and I do honestly believe when Jesse began to communicate, and in his way it was speech, when he could figure out how to communicate in some way, it did relieve some of the behaviors, but not all of them. It didn't disappear. But I remember thinking, okay, if he would just sleep, everything would be better. Or if he could just speak, everything would be better. And autism's still there no matter what, but it is like you do put so much on it.
But you're right, Jaime and Kierra, like about the communication, because again, one of the things was when she was younger, Jackie said, everyone is expecting things from her. She has to be able to communicate, whether it's verbally, on a device, sign language. Communication, like Kierra said, is communication. It's not always verbal. But if she can't communicate, and all these people and all of these therapies are expecting all of these things from her, everyone is just setting this kid up to fail. First and foremost, she needs to be able to communicate, and we need to figure out how that's going to look, kind of thing. And you're right, the moment, and for us initially, it was a little sign language, and just that tiny bit of communication, like you just said, Jaime, took a lot of the behaviors away. Like
Yeah.
almost instantly. It's like, the typical more and all that, just simple things that
Could
she
you
was able to
imagine?
communicate, right? Yeah.
That wasn't our experience because Alyssa just thought if she did this, then she could have whatever she
Then
wanted.
she could get
That's-
it. Yeah.
That was
Well,
everything.
that's what you get for
Everything.
rewarding that. You reward that so much that they're
Right?
like, okay, give me another note.
This is and like
To
if she
our
would want
to our
she
not
would want
subscribers,
Oh, yeah.
every mom here, we're a
Sorry.
podcast, ladies. It goes to the ears. All of the moms here are signing more. The
More.
figure eight, like more,
subscribe
more,
and
because
you
our
can see
kids.
our wonderful sign language.
Yeah,
I could do more. Yep.
all of our kids can say no with their mouth and more with their hands.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much, Kierra, for coming on. We have to have you back when you're in grad school, and then when you're done, and when you're SLP. You're gonna be our resident SLP.
I mean, how lucky are we? Two
And-
Mcisaacs tonight.
I know it. And Kierra, if Massachusetts doesn't want to host your further education, call an auntie. Just call an auntie.
And I mean,
Oh,
can you
I'll
imagine
fly
having an
everywhere,
international
don't worry.
license?
International
cool.
license. We've made
All
that
the-
up for
I
you.
have a pool.
We'll make you
I have
one
a
on
pool.
Canva.
What else you want? I got a sauna.
Did you say pool?
Got a
I'm
pool.
from-
I have a hot pool.
coming.
I have a
Your mom will
sauna.
take you to any hotel, and you can swim in the pool when you want.
I'm sure Jaime has a blow up pool in the yard in the summer.
Yeah, we're fighting for you.
So funny.
Just kidding. Stay in Massachusetts, or else your mom will kill us.
Yeah, I don't need
Love
Kimmy
you.
coming after me.
Thank
No,
you for
yeah.
coming on.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you
Kierra.
for having me.
Thank you
Yeah,
for listening
thank
to us
you.
every Monday night.
Thank you for teaching me all these things, even though I kind of forget them after you tell me.
Also, I like to tell mom things I learned, and then mom likes to argue with me.
I do. I do.
That's
Oh my
not-
God,
I'm
that's
like,
our
oh.
favorite part too. She does that to
That's
us
not
as well.
the case.
I go, I don't know about that. She's like, well, I'm like,
One
"Mm."
time, like we're literally saying the same exact thing in different ways, and she's like no.
You
So,
should
like,
build
my-
a logo with her.
So my thing was like talking about ABA, which I do agree with a lot of the stuff about ABA, but
Yeah.
I also feel like every kid's different and every family's need is different. So if your child is hurting themselves, like really hurting themselves or really hurting other people, then like I think the kind of
My daughter's
downsides to
9. We're
ABA
fixing to go back to ABA. Like sometimes
out
a
the
good
window.
fit.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to like prioritize what, and to me, like safety is the most important thing. Like that comes over. But like there are lots of children on the spectrum that don't have issues with self-injury or aggression, and that might not be the best route for them. So I feel like it's just something that does kind of work with some of these behaviors. Like with Alyssa, like she eloped, she hurt herself, she hurt other people. She didn't have typical ABA. It was like ABA. They did some ABA practices, but didn't necessarily wasn't full ABA. But like,
You said in the Mary Ellen ABA principles, which sounded very savvy.
yes, ABA principles. That's right. So which is like the
Mhm.
just the data and the almost any behavior therapy is going to be reward based. I mean, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. I've yet to come across one that isn't, but I mean, I don't know, maybe there is. But now we have the opposite side of now everything's prompt dependent, and now that jeopardizes our safety on the other
Mhm.
end.
Yeah, and I remember I think it was about my teacher's research. We were talking about like how sometimes children with autism don't have that ability to tune out like sounds or certain things, and you're like, she can just hear better. And I was like, no, we learned that like it's actually that like some kids can't like tune these things out, and you're like, I don't think so. And then a couple days later, you're like, wait, you're right.
So I feel like it's just one of those things that we're like, okay, like she has super hearing because she literally does have super hearing. Whether I don't know what that technically is until I met Rachel's like, yeah, my kid can hear the apartment next door, and I'm like, oh, like this is a thing now. Like
I
you
lived in a
just
townhome, Kiki. I lived in a townhome, and my daughter would flip every time they made ramen noodles. When that beeper went off, I mean, I'm like, excuse me, could you just open the door earlier, please?
Yeah, we need to share. We need to share.
but yeah, but like it's not actually that she has super hearing. It's the fact that like
She can't tune out those like background noises.
Hearing
Like
everything at once. Would
Yeah.
be-
which is
cranked
kind of
up.
like super hearing. I don't know. Kind of sounds the same.
I
to
mean,
me.
I guess you are kind of right.
just not one thing. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for
Of
listening.
course.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
The more we
everyone.
know.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Talk Like a Mother Parenting Autism podcast. If you are enjoying our podcast, make sure to rate and review us wherever you listen. And if you'd like to support us, you can become a subscriber. Just check out the description of this episode. Give us a follow on Facebook and Instagram for more content, and we'll see you next time.